In this exercise, I want to get some of the fundamentals out of the way. I want to talk about Photoshop's color modes. And I also want to have a closer look at the channels palette as well. So to start things off, go ahead and pop open a project file. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, exactly which file you grab. I'll grab barn1.jpg, or of course you can use your own file if you want. Now, when I pop this guy open, don't forget, right along the document tab at the top, it tells me the color mode of the file that I'm working with, right? So right now I'm working with an RGB image. Now, what I want to do is I want to grab my channels palette, this guy here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tear him away here so we can focus on him, and I'll collapse everything down so we can get everything else out of the way. We were introduced to the channels palette or panel not too long ago, and I gave you a very brief rundown of how the channels palette works. Let's now take a closer look at how this guy functions. So once again, a quick recap. We have what's referred to as the composite channel at the top. So I'm inside an RGB image, an image that's comprised of red, green, and blue. So at the top of the channels palette, I have an RGB composite channel. And then below that, I have a single channel for each of the colors that make up my image. So red, green, and blue. And each of these individual color channels, when I select them here inside the channels palette, reveals itself as a grayscale or black and white image inside the main Photoshop screen. Now, why the heck is that? Well, how it works here, I'm going to use green, for instance, so I'm going to highlight green. How this works is dark areas inside this grayscale or black and white image would be filled with a lot of green. Black areas would be filled with, let's say, 100% green. Lighter areas have very little green, and white areas have 0% green. Okay? And of course, I can go all the way back to my composite channel at the top and get an idea of what my image looks like with all three color channels turned on: red, green, and blue. So that's how that works. Now, are there other color spaces, other color modes that I can work with inside Photoshop? Absolutely. There's actually a bunch of them. I'm going to head up to the image menu and then down to mode, and we've got a bunch of them here. So right now we're inside RGB. We could go grayscale or black and white. We could go indexed, and we could go CMYK, lab, or multi-channel. Now, to be honest, I use RGB a lot. 90% of the time I'm using RGB. I use CMYK sometimes when I'm working in the world of print. I'll talk more about CMYK in just a moment. And grayscale I'll sometimes use if I want to convert my image to a black and white image, although there are other techniques for doing that as well. And indexed colors used oftentimes when I'm building graphics for the web. Now let's talk about CMYK for a moment. Go ahead and select CMYK. If I choose that guy, what happens is I get a warning here, a message: you're about to convert to CMYK using the, and then I have a particular color profile set here inside Photoshop. I can go and change that color profile if I want to. I want to try and keep things straightforward here for you and not too advanced. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And what happens is Photoshop converts my RGB barn to a CMYK barn. As a matter of fact, on the document tab, it says barn1.jpg CMYK. And inside the channels palette now, I see a CMYK composite channel and then individual channels for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And these grayscale images that we're seeing work exactly the same way. So, for instance, I click on yellow, and this shadow area in the roof of the barn, it's dark, but it isn't pure black. So there is yellow in there, just not a whole lot of yellow. But there's a lot of black in there, for instance. There's a little bit of magenta in there, and there's a little bit of cyan in there. Stack them all together, and we get a full color, full CMYK image. So all we're doing really is breaking down our image on a channel by channel basis. I hope that makes sense. Now, if I really wanted to, I could do something like this: image, and then down to mode, and then I could go grayscale, and it says discard color information. I'm going to say, yeah, go for it. And what winds up happening is our image is converted to a black and white image, and we have a single gray channel inside the channels palette. So I'm going to undo that and go back, just Control or Command Z, by the way, on your keyboard. take us back to CMYK. Now, as far as color correction goes, some of the real pros, the super pros, what they'll do is they'll come in to color correct their image, but they won't be color correcting the composite image. They'll be color correcting just cyan or just yellow, or perhaps in an RGB image, just the reds or just the greens or just the blues, perhaps to adjust for a color cast or something like this. I've seen guys doing this in color labs. It's really amazing to watch them work. Anyway, so there you go. That's kind of a breakdown of Photoshop's color modes, the different color spaces. I wanted to give you a proper tour of the channels palette as well. One ground rule that I will leave you with, two ground rules that I'll leave you with. The first one is don't keep switching your photos between color modes. We went from RGB to CMYK. I would not want to go back to RGB and then later on go, oh, I'm going to go back to CMYK. That's like translating from English to Japanese and then from Japanese back to English and then English back to Japanese, right? We're going to lose information along the way every time we convert back and forth. Okay, that's the first rule. The second rule is keep your images inside the RGB color space all the way along until you're finally ready to send your job off to a printing press. Then convert to CMYK and perhaps do some minor adjustment before you send it off. So, in other words, what I'm saying is most of your color correction should be happening inside the RGB color space.